What's up, NFL Draft fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the TDN 100 Update Show. Kyle Krabs joined by Joe Marino, Keith Sanchez, and Damian Parson, and we are going to sit through and talk about this latest TDN 100 update, which features our top 100 prospects eligible for the 2022 NFL Draft. Some big changes this time around. The underclassmen declaration has come and gone, and we've lost somewhere between 10 and 15% of what the previous TDN 100 showing was. So you're going to see a lot of new names and new faces. What I want to start with is names that were in last iteration of TDN 100 when we did it in December and have decided to go back to school, whether that's through the transfer portal or ultimately deciding they wanted another year. Those names: Brandon Joseph, safety, Northwestern, who checked in at 95th. Jordan Battle, Alabama safety, 41st. Alabama linebacker Henry To'o, 38th. Iowa State wide receiver Xavier Hutchinson at 58. Zach Charbonnet, UCLA running back at 73. Ohio State defensive end Zach Harrison at 79. Emil Okoye, offensive guard from Alabama at 81. And Jack Campbell, linebacker from Iowa at 100. So, Keith, I'm going to start this with you. Because you're probably pretty ticked off that Alabama lost the national championship game because all these Bama dudes decided to come back. Which one were you most surprised to see decide return to school for another year?
I would say it would be linebacker Henry To'o, just because he is a very good football player. I had this guy with a high second to a first round grade. And I think as a linebacker, just when you talk about positional value, that's about as good as it gets, right? Like, it's not too, like, linebackers are pretty undervalued in the NFL, but this guy was a good football player. It doesn't bode well for the SEC when it comes to Georgia and Auburn and the rest of those guys, but you know that this was a clear recruiting pitch by Nick Saban. But my biggest disappointment was Henry To'o because I thought he was a really good football player, and I thought he was a guy that could immediately step on the field.
Joe, I wanted to ask you, amongst all of the players, regardless on whether or not they were on TDN 100, but who was a player who surprised you with the decision to go back to school for another season?
I think the guy that surprised me the most was one of the guys you mentioned, Kyle, running back Zach Charbonnet from UCLA. We talk about running backs all the time. You got to strike while the iron's hot. He had a great season. He's a different type of back in terms of what this class offers. We kind of peek ahead to next year's group and some really good names. And I thought he had a chance to be a top 3, at worst top 5 back in this year's class and really bring that downhill presence. And he's got some speed about him. And he's got that body type that works in the NFL. And so I thought he had a chance to be a player that was a day 2 pick, that was a player that teams would identify as a feature back. And he said, let's go one more year at UCLA and join a more crowded situation next year.
It can't help but see Damian shaking his head. So, Damian, I know you love scouting the running back position in general. So would love to hear your thoughts just a little bit on the class and where you thought Charbonnet could have slotted in it, and ultimately that decision and where it leaves the rest of the running backs class. We have 6 running backs in TDN 100: Kenneth Walker, Isaiah Spiller, Kyren Williams, James Cook, Hassan Haskins, and Breece Hall.
Man, losing Zach Charbonnet, I believe I gave him a grade of an 80. Had him around second round. Like Joe said, that physical downhill presence. He brings a nasty attitude to a running offense, and he had some juice to separate from defenders. I was really hoping that he came out. I was really shocked that he went back. I was like, man, like Joe said, going to next year's class, that's a loaded group. And it's a loaded group of a bunch of versatile guys that can catch the ball, that can do a lot of different things that Charbonnet doesn't exactly do himself. So it's making his job a little harder when it comes down to being drafted. But looking at this class, it's going to bump up guys like Tyler Algier from BYU, right? It's going to bump some of these guys up there on the back end. That maybe RB 6 or 7 initially, but you take Zach Charbonnet out and then move some of these guys up. James Cook, another versatile piece at the running back position that we're going to see down in Mobile, that does a lot of great things. He can run between the tackles, run on the edges, and he catches the football out of the backfield. Breece Hall is another guy that, of course, had the big name coming in. But, he may not rank as high as on the TDN 100 as some people would expect. But losing Charbonnet is going to really pump up some of these other guys in this class. It's going to to me, it's not going to make it as cloudy. It's going to kind of clear some things up. You're going to see some guys that are still going to be probably 4th, 5th round selections, but instead of them going later, they can kind of bump up a couple rounds.
Yeah, you mentioned James Cook and the opportunity that he has down in Mobile to showcase himself in a little bit bigger role with all the backs he had to share that Georgia backfield with.
Brian Robinson Jr. is another one as well.
Yep, absolutely. So let's get into some risers and fallers. The three biggest fallers, 15 spots down, Darian Kendrick, cornerback, Georgia. 14 spots, Kentucky offensive lineman Darian Kennard. And Notre Dame running back, there's that running back position, Kyren Williams, down 14 spots as well. So those were our three biggest fallers. And we as a collective group had a chance to watch Darian Kennard a couple weeks ago. We broke down some tape, and we're looking at offensive line traits. So I'd like to open the floor to whichever you guys would like to start this conversation. First, when you watch Darian Kennard, your expectations versus the summer versus what you saw when we watched him play against the Georgia Bulldogs. What did you see? And are you surprised to see him either still hanging around in the top 64? He checks in 58th on the TDN 100. Or are you surprised to see him that low? Not all at once. Come on.
I'll take it from here. I'm actually not surprised that Darian Kennard is still in this area. And when I was grading him, I did drop him some. I believe I dropped him maybe the most out of everybody. But I did keep him in that lower second round grade, and that's just because of the measurables. I think NFL teams, no matter what they're going to bet on the measurables, I think Darian Kennard is 6'5", 330 pounds, and he flashes some ability. It's just the issues with his technique, right? When we watched him as a staff, we seen that he didn't have really good feet. He had bad technique. He was always on one foot. He was off balance. He didn't play with good leverage. And I think that NFL teams on the next level, somebody's going to take a flyer on him and say, hey, I can coach this guy up. But there aren't too many 6'5", 300-pound human beings just walking around, period. And we always talk about in the NFL, there's a lack of tackles and a lack of offensive linemen overall. So I think some GM is going to take a flyer on it for sure.
Well, I think someone's definitely going to take a flyer on him, but once you do take that deep dive into the film, you see some issues, like you mentioned, Keith, the footwork, the bend, the leverage, also his hands, very tardy to activate his hands. And so he needs a lot of work. And so, yeah, the size is appealing, the physicality, the power that exists, absent of technique is really, really appealing. He probably has to kick inside to guard, but there's a lot of projection with Kennard. And so it is really just about, hey, I just want this big dude. And I feel like if I can coach him up, I can get something. But, I think when we rank players, Kyle likes to phrase it like this, and it really hits home with me. It's really risk assessment, where you take what this player is, forecast it to the next level, and what's the likelihood of them becoming the type of player that you think they can be at their best. And I think there's a lot of issues present with Kennard as you make that forecast.
So Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Kyle. I was going to agree with Joe, and we always talk about guys with the most to gain at the Senior Bowl. I think this guy has the most to lose, because I think he's been kind of just skating under the radar, and nobody really dived into the film like we have to understand all of the issues that he has as far as his technique. And I think once we get into one-on-one drills and those GMs and those scouts really dive into him, I think he's a guy that possibly has a lot to lose at the Senior Bowl.
Damien.
Yeah. So yeah, one thing about him, when you talk about his technique, he has wide hands, right? When he's engaging, his hands are outside the frame. They are on the outside of the shoulder pads. And in the NFL, with rushers being able to give you that knockback power and try to disengage, to me, that's risk assessment for flags, for holding penalties. He has to tighten his hands up and get closer to the chest plate, because when you're outside, for one, when you have your hands that wide, he's allowing guys to get into his chest that loses leverage. That's not really a good thing. So he has the raw ability, the size, the strength, the physical aesthetics and appeal. But technically, he's a guy that you need to, if you're going to draft him, you're going to want to sit him for a little bit just so you can work with him on his overall technique in his game. Because again, with his footwork, with his hands, put him on the edge, on the perimeter against some of these athletic, agile, just speed rushers. I'm not really a fan of it. Like Joe said, kick him inside, and especially in a power run game, have him at guard. I really think that's where you get the best out of him. But he has to work on that technique, sit him for a little bit, and let's correct those hands.
Damien, I'm going to come back to you, because this show is it's a house divided, and you and I are on the right side of the house, okay? Because I'm looking at everybody's individual ballots for Kyren Williams, and you and I were real close. You had him 62nd. I had him 65th. These other two knuckleheads had him in the 80s. So I wanted to ask you, are you surprised Kyren Williams? I mean, he's been a guy who throughout this process for us has consistently floated. He was 60th coming out of the summer. Then he was 58th in October, 72nd in November, 63rd in December. He's been right there on that fringe, and now he's down to 77th. Are you surprised? What about Kyren Williams' skill set do you like? Do you not like? I'm assuming you see all the good things that I really enjoy in Kyren Williams' game. And that's not to say these other guys don't either, but you put him in the 60s. So that means I got to start with you.
Yeah, no, I really like Kyren Williams, man. You know, I know the size a lot of times comes up with him being 5'9", about 199, 200 pounds, but the play strength, the play physicality, you see when he's lined up in the backfield in pass protection, arguably the best pass protector, if not the best pass protector in this class. He stonewalls defensive ends, linebackers that are blitzing. He has great awareness and vision to scan left to right to keep his quarterback clean. And then as a running back, patient, decisive. He's got that long speed as well, that burst in open field. And then his contact balance for a guy that's lower than 200 pounds, lower than 205. He doesn't get knocked around. He doesn't get ragdoll in the run game. He's not a tippy toe type of running back, right? He's decisive. He plants, he gets upfield. I really like his game. And then I think the underrated aspect of him, I think we can see in the NFL is his ability to catch the football. I want to see that. I want to see somebody off, pretty much use him more so in the passing game. But I like Kyren Williams.
Yeah, this is a guy who was recruited out of high school technically as a slot receiver and has transitioned to the wide receiver or the running back position. But I want to give Joe or Keith a chance to defend yourself. Tell us that you still like Kyren Williams, even though you ranked him a little bit low. I mean, the floor is yours, gentlemen. Anywhere you'd like to go. And then we do need to transition over into some of the risers and recognize them as well.
I think it's pretty simple. I mean, recognizing what he does well is pretty straightforward. He's probably the best back in this class in terms of passing down ability, between the pass blocking ability and the pass catching ability. You just wish he was either a little bit bigger or a little bit more explosive, right? He's just kind of he just doesn't add up in a lot of ways. He's a unique player. I just feel like he's going to be a nice complementary back. I just feel like there's other players in this class that gives you more in terms of a guy that you project to an expanded role at the next level.
Let's go, Joe. I couldn't have said it better myself, man. You know what they say? Great minds think alike, man. Great minds think alike.
Well, listen, if you told me that you could get a guy like Gio Bernard, who's my comp, in the third round, I think you're getting really good value for that pick. But speaking of really good value, let's talk about the risers. We're going to recognize the top 5 risers in this iteration of TDN 100. In the number 1 spot, Joe, eat your heart out. Tyler Smith, offensive lineman, Tulsa, our biggest riser, up 29 spots, up to 70th this time around for Tyler Smith. I'm eating my heart out for Wyoming linebacker Chad Muma, our second biggest riser at 22 spots up. He's up to 75th. Joe, back to you. Mario Goodrich, Clemson cornerback, also up 22 spots, up to 71st. Cameron Thomas, defensive end from San Diego State, is up 20 spots. He's at 56. And Logan Hall, defensive end from Houston, is up 19 spots to 37. So, Joe, a lot of action in your region for risers here. Guys who didn't start, none of them coming out of summer were top 100 players, and they have steadily throughout the course of this season showcased themselves enough. They were all in the last version, but in the very bottom 10 of names that were added. So talk about whichever one of these guys pops the most to you.
Well, it's amazing to hear that my colleagues are finally in on some of my guys. I've been pounding the table. Sounds like the sermons are finally hitting home, tugging at those heartstrings for you guys. I got to talk about Tyler Smith. And I think what this really comes down to is we were so unsure if this guy was even going to be in this class because there's been no indication. There were some reports that he was going to stay. And then he took it right down to the wire. Didn't even tell anybody. He just submitted the paperwork to the league and said, I'm in, guys. Watch my tape. It speaks for itself. And I think a guy with his size and physicality and aggressive demeanor is the type of player that I think any offensive line coach would love to get their hands on.
So can we collectively talk about these two smaller school, not small school, but smaller school defensive ends? And they're both big-time traits guys, 6'5", 6'6", 270 plus pounds. These are guys that are threatening in some mock drafts to get up into the first round and the last 8 picks of the first round. So anybody who's had any thoughts they'd like to share about either the pass rush group as a whole and these guys making their presence felt. We're going to get a chance to see both of these guys down in Mobile as well. What's anybody got any thoughts on Cameron Thomas and Logan Hall?
I really like Cameron Thomas. You know, that 4-3 skill set that he has. He's got the long arms, the long body, 6'5", 270, but his motor is relentless. He does not stop. He's got good handwork, good power at the point of attack, good pop to push back offensive linemen. And like I said, his ability to work upfield, I really like what he's going to, because he's going to be in Mobile, correct? Is he in Mobile? Yes. So I'm looking forward to seeing him there, just seeing him in those one-on-ones against some of these bigger schooled guys, right? Get that one-on-ones inside and outside against some of these guards, because I do believe he can kick into that 3-tech or that 4-eye and rush from there. If you have an edge rusher that has more of the speed element on the outside, you can kick Cameron Thomas down. But you think about, I remember hearing we know so much about Aiden Hutchinson, and I heard that he was the small school version of Aiden Hutchinson. That's what really kind of turned me on to watching him. And I can't lie, I don't disagree. That motor, that physicality, that power, that length, I'm all in.
Let's shift gears. Let's go to the trenches, but on the other side of the ball, the offensive line. Guys, there are 18 offensive linemen in this edition of the TDN 100. We've talked about the depth of the edge class. We've talked about the depth of the corner class, the wide receiver class. But this offensive line group, you've seen all these big-time pass rushers come through over the past couple of years in the NFL draft process. We have needed a re-energized young group of NFL offensive linemen to kind of help balance the scales a little bit. And this feels like one of those classes, along with the one that put through Tristan Wirfs and Jedrick Wills and Andrew Thomas, all in the same group, right? This feels like another class that can help accomplish that. So I want to read through these 18 names, and then the floor is going to be open, okay? Ikem Ekwonu, offensive tackle, NC State, number 4 overall. He's our number 1 offensive lineman, number 1 tackle, just ahead of Evan Neal, offensive tackle from Alabama, who comes in at number 7. Kenyon Green's been about as consistent as it gets in TDN 100. He's been our 10th rated player for each of the last 4 updates that we've done. He's an offensive guard from Texas A&M. Tyler Linderbaum right behind him at 11, the center from Iowa. Charles Cross right behind him at 12, the left tackle from Mississippi State. Trevor Penning, Northern Iowa, 21st overall offensive tackle. Nicholas Petit-Frere, left tackle, Ohio State at 28 overall. Zion Johnson, Joe's guy, interior offensive lineman from Boston College at 32. So that right alone is your cutoff for interior offensive linemen. And that's 8, or for first round top 32 offensive linemen, and there's 8 of them. Daniel Falele, offensive tackle, Minnesota, 47. Sean Ryan, UCLA, 50. Jamari Salyer, Georgia, 54. Darian Kennard, 58 from Kentucky. We already talked about him. Tyler Smith, Tulsa, 70. We already talked about him. Ed Ingram, LSU, 73. Left tackle Jackson Kirkland from Washington, 74. Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan, another left tackle at 76. Louisiana's Max Mitchell at 96. And Abraham Lucas from Washington State at 100. Got to catch my breath, so please feel free. Go ahead.
Well, I'll talk about my guy, Zion Johnson, coming in as a top 32 player on the board out of Boston College. And he's just such a high floor player. And I know that that's a very easy thing to say about offensive linemen, but watch him play. All the fundamentals are there. The technique's there. The size is there. The positional flexibility is there. He gets after people. He's got the right temperament. He stays square. He's always under control. He plays within himself. I mean, just as solid as they come as an offensive lineman. You just kind of love the story here where he's a non-scholarship athlete at Davidson in the Charlotte area, goes to Boston College, doesn't take long for him to become a starter. And we know Boston College, they're known for the offensive linemen that they put through. This guy claims a job right away, goes over to left tackle for 2020, kicks back to guard for 2021, and just plays at a high level week after week after week. I love the consistency with Zion Johnson.
Joe, what's the ceiling for him from a projection standpoint? I mean, you look at the Raiders at 22 and the Dolphins somewhere at 25, 26. Can you see him getting up higher than that?
Well, I think it's going to be easy to bring Elijah Vera Tucker into the conversation because there's so many parallels in terms of skill set and the year where they played left tackle and good tape at both spots, maybe some issues at tackle more so than guard. But, you know, you saw the Jets go out and say, hey, this is the type of player that we need for the interior of our offensive line with our young quarterback. And there's no shortage of teams that have that same dynamic. And so whether it's a team that has a young quarterback that needs consistency on their interior, or, you look at the back half of this first round, the back 10, 12 picks, the same need exists. And so I think Zion Johnson's going to be the beneficiary of just a ton of landing spots where it would make a lot of sense for him to come in and be a very high floor impact type starter right away, in my opinion.
So, Keith, I want to come to you and ask you about Charles Cross, who checks in at 12th on our list, and everybody here had him in the top 20. But you were the lowest at 19, and you're the one who did the deep dive on him. So you're at this point in our process, we're starting cross checks as soon as the All-Star events are over. So we'll get all of our collective eyes on Charles Cross here in just a couple weeks. But talk to us about Charles. I know there's a lot of people out there who are really big fans of his game. Obviously, he's very savvy in pass protection. He's got really good movement skills. What did you see on Charles Cross that has you excited and then conversely also has you a little anxious?
Yeah, I think what has me excited is what has everybody excited, right? And a superb athlete at the left tackle position. This guy can redirect. He can still move his feet while he's still engaged with defenders. And you know that he's basically, I guess you would say, a lockdown guy at left tackle. What concerns me is just his overall true body mass. Like, we don't know if this guy is 260 or if he's 290. So I'm really kind of waiting to go through the process to see how big he truly is, because the conversion of speed to power for edge rushers, it kind of concerns me to see if he'll really get collapsed into the pocket when you talk about being a first round guy. I didn't have him as high as you guys, but I still had him as a back end of the first round guy, because I think that you still can develop, and let's see just how broad he is and how much true weight we can put on him before we kind of dictate that.
Damian, I'm going to give you the open floor. Any offensive lineman whose name's been reeled off here, somebody that you're excited about, somebody that you think you might stand alone with an opinion on, let's just have an airing of grievances or perhaps confessions, whatever is necessary from your perspective on these offensive line.
Well, if you go back to Thursday when me and Keith Spicy Sanchez did the mock draft, I gave Trevor Penning in the top, I believe it was top 15 to the Baltimore Ravens. I love Trevor Penning. And some would say it's the running back bias in me. I love a physical, nasty, savage, gritty offensive lineman that's going to open run holes and protect me as a running back. But I love what he brings to the passing game as well. He's a 6'7", just long body, long arm, 321 in terms of weight. He does have some issues kind of redirecting with the hard inside moves, but I trust him in pass protection at the left or right tackle. But again, what he's going to bring in the run game is going to be so impactful for a running team like the Baltimore Ravens or another team that wants to be physical and vertically displace defensive linemen and linebackers at the second level. He's somebody that can help double team, help get and climb to those second level defenders. And like I said, just create not just running lanes, but create alleys for running backs to see daylight and hit it. I'm really big on him. His teammate, who I was high on last year, Spencer Brown, is doing great work over there with the Buffalo Bills, and I think he's going to do the exact same thing.
So, for a guy I'd like to recognize, the Daniel Falele train is leaving the station. I don't know if you guys noticed, but Daniel Jeremiah last week put him in the first round of his mock draft, and for ourselves in the TDN 100 projection, we're on that steady up and to the right climb, which is exactly what you want to see. He started 64th coming out of the summer, 67th, and he sat out 2020. So we were evaluating him in the summertime based off his 2019 tape. So he went from 64th to 67th, 66th. December, he was up to 51st, and now he's up to 47th. And we've got a couple of votes here in the low 40s for him on individual ballots. And Damon, you talk about a guy that's just mean, nasty, mauler, 6'8", 380 pounds. He's gotten involved in short yardage down in the goal line, so he's an athlete. This guy had offers from every major program in the country before ever taking a single snap of American football when Michigan found him down in Australia for a recruitment camp. And Falele, the movement skills that he provides is what really moves the needle for me. Somebody who's as big as he is, who can run backside cutoff on 3 techniques, and has just the amount of monumental mass where even if his pass sets aren't super clean, and Minnesota does run a lot of RPOs at a very high rate, so you don't get a chance to see him in true pass sets very frequently. But when you are 6'8" and have the reach that he does and the movement skills, it doesn't have to be pretty. And I think that's something that a lot of people sometimes do get caught up on is what the fundamentals look like. And whether we're talking to Jordan Palmer, talking about quarterbacks and throwing mechanics, or we're talking about wide receivers running their routes. If it works, it doesn't have to look exactly the same from player to player. And Daniel Falele is going to test your eye because he is so untraditionally large. But the movement skills that he provides is really, really exciting. And offensive coaches in the NFL are going to look at that skill set and say, whatever he needs to get cleaned up, we can coach him up. It's not a problem. I just can't teach you to be 5 or 6'8", 380, 400 pounds and run probably a 5 flat in the 40-yard dash. I'll take care of the rest. That's fine. So Daniel Falele, I think it's really going to be fascinating to see where his ceiling in this process ends up, because he's got all the unteachables. And it's one of those ultimate tests of, do you want the experience and the fundamentals and the technique, or do you want all the things that you can't coach somebody to be and trust yourself that you're going to get the best out of them elsewhere? Would like to bring this conversation back to one additional name. And this was a name that we were pretty high on coming out of the summer. As recently as October, he was in the 30s in TDN 100, and he slipped all the way down into the 70s at this point in time. And it's Jackson Kirkland, the offensive tackle from Washington. Joe, I'd like to start with you. Jackson Kirkland, you were part of this process in the summertime with us. When we went through cross checks, which we were all a part of in the summertime, we all had a chance to get eyes on Jackson, and we liked a lot of what we saw. What is it about Jackson Kirkland's game that has not evolved, or he has not shown, that has kind of resulted in this tumble and slide at this point?
Yeah, so over the summer, the big appeal with Jackson Kirkland when studying that tape was, wow, this guy was this massive guard that dropped weight, kicks over to left tackle, and he played really well. You didn't really get the sense that this was a player that was new to a position. And then you watch him this year, and he got tested in ways that he really didn't in the previous season, kind of a soft slate of pass rushers where that really upticked this year. And you saw that the robotic player that he was last season worked against the players he was going up against, but he was challenged in new ways this season. And I think that's kind of opened our eyes to the fact that he does need more growth at left tackle. And so while he's still a very appealing player, he's maybe not quite the plug and play option that maybe we thought he could be after studying his tape back from 2020. So,
gentlemen, we're going to talk about the top of this draft class, the top of the TDN 100, which is continuing to evolve. But one thing that really is not evolving is the standardized opinion of many of the names across the top. Of our top 26 players, there are only 2 that were not unanimous top 32 votes across every single scout on staff, which might not be a surprise until I tell you who those players were that did not get unanimous support. Georgia defensive end Trayvon Walker was left out of one individual's top 32 ballot. And Pittsburgh quarterback Kenny Pickett was left off of one top 32 ballot. Does anybody want to do any finger pointing before we have some people explain themselves on what happened?
I don't have anything to explain. I had both of those players in my.
Okay, well, that for dramatic effect, we're going to ask the producers to cut that out, see if they can do that. But Joe, would you like to guess who Kenny Pickett's biggest doubter is at this point?
I'm going to go with Damian. Oh. Damian is Kenny Pickett's biggest doubter.
Damian had Kenny Pickett 19th.
Oh, wow.
You're talking at Kenny Pickett's biggest doubter right now. So I'd like you to ask me what questions you have for me about putting Kenny Pickett. I put him 33rd on my TDN 100 ballot.
So Kyle, what concerns do you have about Kenny Pickett?
Wow. Okay, just going to go wide open question. I am waiting for some quarterback to commandeer the narrative. And I've heard you talk about Kenny Pickett and what he showed this year. And we're going to be honest, he played the best out of all the top quarterbacks in this class. And that's true because I've watched Kenny Pickett play. But I can't help but also survey this landscape. And it's not open and shut that Kenny Pickett is QB1. And until that confidence in this space is there, I'm going to be skeptical, because it's much like the top of our TDN 100. We have a three-way tie for the number one spot. And what you see as a result is when you get into mock drafts, you see Evan Neal in the number one spot. You see Ike Mekwonu in the number one spot. You see Kayvon Thibodeau in the number one spot. You see Aiden Hutchinson in the number one spot. It's wide open still. And we will know, because there's still a lot of this process left. But I look at Kenny Pickett, and I'm hoping he goes down to Mobile and he makes this an open and shut case. But the narrative from people in the know is not that Kenny Pickett is your unquestioned number one quarterback in this NFL draft. He's my number one quarterback too. I don't have any convictions on any of the quarterbacks in this class. So I hope that answers your question. And if you have any follow-ups, I'd be happy to answer them.
It sounds like to me that you just need more exposures to these quarterbacks to settle on who the one that you like the most is. You just said Kenny Pickett's your number one quarterback. It's not that you don't like him. You just want to see a little bit more. You want more exposures to have more convictions about the way you stack them. And I certainly understand that.
But, and we've already referred to this phrase, right? It's risk assessment. We on the outside of this process are conducting risk assessments. I don't know how much higher the ceiling is for me for Kenny Pickett or any of the quarterbacks in this class, because I do think Kenny, the 1 year sample size is going to be a question. His hand size and ability to handle an NFL football with wearing two gloves is going to be a question that he is going to face throughout the draft process. I'm hoping he goes down to Mobile and he slings the pill around like there's no tomorrow. And we don't have to ask that question anymore. But that is an outlier on his resume that for him to go on to become a high-level starter, you have to be wary about the landing spot and the environment, the climate that he's going to play in. So I just don't know how much personal more conviction I'm going to get for Kenny or any of the other quarterbacks in this class.
Well, I feel like Mobile is going to be a great showcase for guys like Carson Strong and Desmond Ridder, where I think their arm talent is really, really going to pop, even a guy like Malik Willis. And so for Kenny Pickett, I think it's going to be challenging for him to separate himself there. I think he'll look good in terms of arm talent, but where I think he really has to showcase himself the best is with his accuracy and his ability to be very consistent with ball placement. So as I consider the journey that you have ahead to kind of find those variables that make you have more convictions about the rankings, I think it's going to be interesting to see how these guys showcase themselves and what moves the needle for you, because I don't know if the Senior Bowl is going to be as long as he handles the ball well, right, as he doesn't start not being able to handle it with his smaller hands. But I'm interested if Kenny Pickett can really change much based on what that opportunity is going to present for him to show.
Yeah, I think part of it is just Kenny Pickett's narrative and just his story. I think people just need more exposure to Kenny Pickett. He's, tucked in the Northeast by my guy Kyle, in Pittsburgh, and people don't get a lot of exposure to and people don't get a lot of exposure to him. It wasn't a lot of big games that they've had this season, and just what you would call Heisman moments, especially for quarterbacks that we're used to seeing. Like we've had so much of Trevor Lawrence for the last 3 years, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow went on a magical run that kind of kept just everybody was attracted to. And I think Kenny Pickett is kind of the polar opposite. And just as far as the media exposure we had to Kenny Pickett, I think once we get into the draft process, and then, like I said, once again, people deep dive into the film, maybe there will be kind of a culmination of, hey, Kenny Pickett's the number one guy, and people will feel more comfortable about this guy. And it just kind of speaks to his personality. He seems to be a very mild-mannered kid, that he's not worried about all of the glitz and glamour and the flash type of situations.
Yeah, I mean, I like Kenny Pickett, the touch, timing, the anticipation that he throws with. You could tell he's intelligent from the neck up. And, I mean, he's been in college for a while, so he's mature. When it comes down to the Senior Bowl, I'm looking forward to having that exposure to him, right? And seeing that arm live in person, seeing if it pops off his hand. And because we know what we're going to see, like Joe alluded to, we know what we're going to see from Carson Strong, Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, that A+ arm talent. And Kenny Pickett doesn't have that level of arm talent, but everything else, that phrase that was coined really heavy last year, talking about Mac Jones, the most pro ready, that's Kenny Pickett this year.
So let's shift gears. Let's talk about the other gentleman involved from our top 26 prospects that had an outlier and somebody that didn't put him in the top 32, and that's Trayvon Walker. And Keith, I'm not going to play the games. I'm just going to come right to you. You put him in the same spot I put Kenny Pickett on your ballot. You put him 33rd. So it's not that you don't like Trayvon Walker, but what is it about Trayvon Walker that has you a little bit more skeptical to put him in the upper tier or the top half of the first round in your personal rankings?
Man, I think it's just a matter of finding a specific position for him. And we've done this before in the past with Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins. Just, we like these versatile athletes. But the question is, are they football players? Are they instinctual, intact enough and developed enough to play a specific position on the football field? Because and I tweeted this out, every great athlete isn't a great football player, right? So we can get to the combine and watch these 6'4", 260-pound guys run a 40-yard dash, and then we're like, okay, cool, we really like this kid, but what does he do specifically on a football field that as a defensive coordinator, I feel comfortable telling this guy to do this all the time? I think he flashes ability, but I would like to see it on a more consistent basis, and I would like to see him hone in on one specific position.
I think all that's fair. I think you look at the traits, and it's obvious that he's physically a dominant athlete. It's just a question of, and you get this a lot. I mean, there's questions about this with guys like Isaiah Simmons, and Kyle Hamilton is going to face this same question. There's different kinds of defenders. Did you do too much to really develop in one thing to really own when you get to the pro game, right? And we've seen different outcomes in that regard. So I certainly think that's a fair question to ask of Trayvon Walker at this chapter in his career as he gets ready to transition to the pros. We mentioned Kyle Hamilton just now. Also mentioned we have a three-way tie for the top spot in the TDN 100 update. Would like to read off the top 10, starting from 10 and work on our way up to 1. Kenyon Green, offensive guard, Texas A&M, coming in at number 10. Utah linebacker Devin Lloyd, checking in at number 9. George Karlaftis, the defensive end from Purdue, coming in at number 8. Evan Neal, offensive tackle, Alabama, at number 7. Andrew Booth Jr., the cornerback from Clemson, at number 6. Derek Stingley Jr., the cornerback from LSU, at 5. Ikem Ikwanu from NC State, offensive tackle, at number 4. Number 3 on this spot is going to go to somebody who got one first-place vote, and when we averaged all of the ballots out, he got the same average score across all of our ballots as the two names that have not been read off yet. Michigan defensive end Aiden Hutchinson, who last time was number 1, is tied for first, but ends up in number 3 because he only got one first-place vote out of the ballots. Number 2, Notre Dame's Kyle Hamilton, who spent the summer ranking and the October update at number 1, but then dropped to number 2 in November and then number 3 in December, which means Kayvon Thibodeau from Oregon is back to the number 1 spot off of tiebreakers. Again, the average score of all 3 of these guys was a 2. So 2 first-place votes for Thibodeau, 2 first-place votes for Kyle Hamilton, 1 first-place vote for Aiden Hutchinson. Joe, you were the tiebreaker because you had Thibodeau at 2 and Kyle Hamilton at 3. So that you were the deciding factor in who gets put in that top spot for this week. So let's talk a little bit about this wide open top of this draft class. And Damian, I'm going to start with you because you had Kayvon Thibodeau in that number 1 spot.
I'm still on the train, guys. I'm still on the Kayvon Thibodeau train. That the explosive first step, the speed, the power conversion, just everything, the tools, the traits that he has. I know he battled the injuries this year. It was kind of a down year for him, but he showed a lot of the things that he could be once he gets to the NFL. He's still a little raw in some aspects with his hand work and his hand counters, but I still believe in that ceiling that he could be one of the top pass rushers in this league. And to me, Aiden Hutchinson, had a tremendous year, right? But I'm still rolling with Kayvon Thibodeau.
So Joe, ask you about Kayvon coming in at number 2, and he's your number 2 edge as well behind Aiden Hutchinson. What's interesting about this journey for all 3 of these guys is they've all at some point in our monthly updates been in the 1, 2, and 3 spots. So is this really just a kind of, what you know, and you're looking for any new information from here on out that's going to help make those decisions for you? You and I have been doing this a long time, and I cannot remember a top of a draft class in recent memory that has been so interchangeable as you've polled a group of 5 or 6 scouts.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Kyle. I like all 3 of these players, and I don't know that there's a whole lot that separates them. And so I guess because of that, I've just kind of keep it status quo in terms of the way that I've presented my ballots and look for things over the coming months that would change my mind, whether that's athletic testing or pro days or combine stuff. It's just different information that we get as the process goes forward that's going to change things. But based on what I've seen to this point, I still feel like Aiden Hutchinson's my top player. I think he's a game wrecker. I think maybe there's some punishment being handed out that he didn't have 5 sacks in the game against Georgia or something. Meanwhile, Oregon's not even part of the conversation, and I think maybe that could have affected some of the ballots. But I mean, this guy was a game wrecker all year long. He still made a big time impact in the Georgia game. I think it was just an example of how you can scheme up ways to get around a player like Hutchinson. And unfortunately, Michigan didn't meet that moment in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean Aiden Hutchinson's not still one of the best players in the class and not worthy of being my number 1 guy.
So I teased everybody earlier that this was a house divided, and it is once again a house divided, but this time it's me and Keith that are on the right side of history, because Keith also put Kyle Hamilton in that number 1 spot, which is where I cast my ballot for my top player. So Keith, would be really interested in hearing you kind of foil your opinion of Kyle Hamilton, who's your number 1 player at this point in time, versus Trayvon Walker, who we just talked about, because you had asked about Trayvon being asked to do so many different things and that projection and how you perceive that. And then Kyle Hamilton, and I obviously agree with you because I have Kyle Hamilton in the number 1 spot as well. Kyle Hamilton's about as diverse of a player as you're going to find in any draft class. So talk to us about what it is about Kyle that's so special that gives you that confidence despite that versatility question that's going to exist for some people.
Right. And I think the number 1 thing is that Kyle does great things that's specific to playing the safety position. Like I talked about with Trayvon Walker, he's a great athlete, but when you cut on the film, you see Kyle Hamilton, and he's a great football player. He's a great safety. He can play in the box. He has exceptional range. This guy can play the middle third, and he can run from sideline to sideline. He has ball skills. So it's the things that he does playing that position. When we go through our grading scale, right, I think that when you grade per position, he has the highest grades. Like he grades 9s, 10s at every position trait. And that's one thing that I just can't turn down. I know that safety isn't always the number 1 drafted position. And I know that, that may kind of falter guys. And I know that Kyle Hamilton was also injured. But I think when this guy is on, he's the best player in the draft. For Kayvon Thibodeau, speaking about him, he's a physically dominant guy. I just wish he would have been more consistently doing it. The Pac-12 isn't notorious for the guys in the trenches. And when you have a guy that has the size, speed, athleticism, and power, he should have dominated more for me. So that's why I didn't have Kayvon Thibodeau and then Aiden Hutchinson. Like Joe, I really love everything that this guy brings to the table, but still in all, Kyle Hamilton is number 1 for me, baby.
So let's talk about positional value a little bit. I believe it was in October or November, we touched on positional value a little bit as it pertained to Kyle Hamilton, but I don't think anybody's going to sit here and predict or project that Kyle Hamilton is going to be the number 1 player drafted when it's all said and done in April. But I stand with Keith, where you look at the resume of where this player is and the things that he is able to do. He is overwhelming with the impact that he brings to the table. So how would you foil that out, guys? How do you covet positional value versus projecting him in the draft while also appreciating the things that he does bring to the table?
I was going to say, I think for teams, they have to really assess their team, right? I think if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars and you've invested into Trevor Lawrence, then you don't necessarily need Kyle Hamilton. Your most important need right now is protecting your quarterback. But when you get to the Jets, the Giants, y'all have a bunch of holes, and y'all don't necessarily have a direction at quarterback. Mine is Zach Wilson, still trying to figure it out, right? So I think you can take a chance, and you also have multiple draft picks too. So I think on a team-by-team basis, I think you need to assess your draft board, assess the team, and then I think that Kyle Hamilton is the best player, and you find a way to get him on your team because I think he's immediate starter.
Joe, I'll go to you then, Damian, and we'll go ahead and close this up for everybody after that.
Yeah, I think Keith really did a good job of saying what I was thinking there in terms of every team has to look at their opportunity and ask themselves, what decision can I make with this pick that's going to impact my team the most positively? And it's going to be case by case. And I think it's a unique year where, we don't necessarily have a top of the first round quarterback. And I could be convinced of a number of different directions with the number one pick in terms of who that player should be. So the onus is on those teams to say, okay, what can we do with this pick, this opportunity to best improve our football team and pick the player that meets that criteria?
I completely agree with both of those guys. I wouldn't even want to take it back a couple of years ago. Remember when Saquon Barkley, Quentin Nelson, all those guys were coming in, and the Giants selected Saquon Barkley because it was positional value at the time. It seemed more realistic to take a running back that high than a guard. Well, you look at, you go back now, you go a couple of years later, and Quentin Nelson is essentially one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. He kind of revamped and retooled that offensive line in Indy, and Saquon Barkley hasn't been healthy. And then you look at what they could have gotten. They could have selected Quentin Nelson and then took Nick Chubb in the second round, and they would have been in a much better place, in my opinion. So positional value, like they said, talk about what the team needs, but at the same time, just understand best player available. If I have to pick between two different positions, I'm going to pick the one that really matters the most. And this, for me, is typically the trenches.
I hope you guys enjoyed this look at the 2022 NFL Draft and our updated top 100 prospects going into the All-Star event circuit, which is right around the corner. So you got lots to look forward to, which means you need to make sure you stay plugged in over at thedraftnetwork.com and here on the YouTube channel. So make sure you like this video, hit subscribe, and that way you'll know anytime we post new content. And visit thedraftnetwork.com for all your NFL, college football, and NFL draft needs. Kyle Krabs with Joe Marino, Keith Sanchez, and Damian Parson. Thanks as always for watching the Draft Network's TDN 100 update, and we'll talk to you guys again soon.